For more than a decade, Kody Brown stood at the center of one of reality television's most unconventional families, presenting himself as a confident patriarch balancing faith, love, and leadership across multiple marriages. But as we move closer to 2026, the question fans can't stop asking is no longer about plural marriage itself. It's about Kody Brown as a man stripped of the system that once protected him. Where is he now, and how did everything collapse so completely that the once loud, crowded Brown family storyline has narrowed down to isolation, financial questions, and a reputation that may never recover? At the height of Sister Wives, Kody was everywhere. He was decisive, opinionated, and unapologetic about the structure he believed in. The show framed him as the glue holding together for very different women and more than a dozen children. But what viewers are now realizing is that much of that authority was sustained by belief and trust rather than outcomes. When belief faded, the structure didn't bend, it shattered, and once it shattered, Kody was left standing alone at the center of the wreckage, defending decisions that even his closest supporters began to question. The family collapse didn't happen overnight, and that's what makes this story so compelling. It happened slowly, season by season, conversation by conversation. Christine leaving was the first visible crack, but it wasn't the cause. It was the result of years of emotional distance and unmet expectations. Janelle's eventual separation exposed something even more damaging, the realization that loyalty did not equal security. And Mary's quiet exit, marked more by resignation than rage, confirmed what many fans had already suspected. The family Kody once led no longer existed in any meaningful way. What makes Kody's current position so striking is how different it is from the role he once occupied. He is no longer mediating between wives or presenting a united front. Instead, he is often seen explaining himself, defending his past, and reframing the narrative around responsibility and blame. Leadership sounds very different when no one is following anymore, and viewers have noticed that shift immediately. This is where the financial fallout begins to intertwine with the emotional collapse. Over the years, Kody consistently framed major decisions, especially moves and property purchases, as family choices. The move to Flagstaff, the investment in land, the decision to delay building. All of it was sold as collective vision, but once the family fractured, that collective shield disappeared. Each wife began speaking openly about what they sacrificed and what they ended up with. And suddenly, Kody's role in those decisions was no longer abstract, it was personal. Janelle's admission that she felt financially vulnerable after years of contribution stunned viewers, because it contradicted the idea that the family's structure protected everyone equally. Christine's ability to leave with independence highlighted how uneven those outcomes were. Mary's long-standing financial independence raised questions about how much she gave, without receiving emotional or structural support in return. And Kody, for the first time, appeared caught between narratives he could no longer fully control. Let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly in the comments, because this shapes how you see the rest of this story. Do you think Kody genuinely believed the system would work forever? Or do you think he underestimated what would happen if even one wife stopped believing? As the public narrative shifted, so did Kody's image. Once portrayed as assertive and confident, he increasingly appeared reactive and defensive. His language became sharper, his frustration more visible. He spoke about betrayal, loyalty, and respect, but rarely about accountability. That absence matters because when leadership fails, people don't just question intentions, they question competence. And once that happens, authority erodes quickly, financially. Kody's situation has become one of the most speculated aspects of his post-family life. Without the combined household structure, the economic reality of supporting a large family looks very different. Income streams tied to the show are uncertain long-term. Property investments remain unresolved. And the future that was once framed as shared now appears fragmented, whether intentional or not. Kody is now associated with decisions that left others feeling exposed, and that perception follows him wherever the story goes next. What's fascinating is how isolation has become the defining theme of Kody's current chapter. Surrounded once by constant activity and affirmation, he now appears far more limited in who publicly supports him. That doesn't mean he has no one, but it does mean the echo chamber is gone. Every statement is scrutinized, every justification is challenged, and without the buffer of multiple relationships reinforcing his authority, Kody's words carry far less weight than they once did. If you're still watching at this point, make sure you're subscribed, because the next part digs into the exact moments where Kody's leadership style began working against him instead of for him, and how those choices accelerated the collapse in ways that couldn't be reversed. As we approach 2026, the question of where Kody Brown is now isn't just geographic or financial, it's psychological. What happens to someone whose identity was built around control, structure, and leadership when that structure dissolves? What happens when belief systems fail publicly? And how do you rebuild when the very thing that defined you is now the reason people turned away before we move forward? Share this video with another Sister Wives viewer and ask them this question. Was Kody a victim of a collapsing system, or was he the architect of his own downfall? Because in part 2, we're going to walk through the turning points that transformed Kody from a confident patriarch into a man defending his past, including the moments fans believe sealed his isolation long before the final separations were announced, picking up exactly where we left off. Part 2 is where the story stops being about perception and becomes about consequences, because the turning points that reshaped Kody Brown's life didn't happen in a single dramatic moment. They happened through a series of decisions that, at the time, may have felt justified, but in hindsight look like the beginning of irreversible isolation. This is the part of the story where fans began to realize that the collapse of the Brown family wasn't caused by rebellion or betrayal alone, but by a leadership style that could not adapt once loyalty was no longer guaranteed. One of the earliest and most damaging turning points was how Kody handled conflict when it stopped being private. For years, disagreements were managed behind closed doors or softened for the cameras. But as tensions grew, particularly around the move to Flagstaff and the delayed development of Coyote Pass, Kody's responses became increasingly rigid. Instead of compromise, viewers saw ultimatums. Instead of reassurance, they saw frustration. And instead of shared responsibility, they saw blame shift outward. That shift mattered, because families survive disagreement, but they rarely survive resentment combined with control. Christine's departure exposed this weakness immediately. Her decision wasn't impulsive. It was the result of years of feeling emotionally deprioritized. But what shocked viewers was not that she left, it was how Kody responded. Rather than reflecting on what drove her away, he framed her exit as disloyalty to the family system. That framing sent a clear message to the remaining wives. The system mattered more than individual happiness, and once that message landed, the foundation cracked even further. Janelle's experience deepened the fallout. Long viewed as practical and loyal, Janelle believed in the long-term vision more than almost anyone else. She contributed financially, trusted the plan, and delayed personal security for the sake of shared goals. When she later admitted that she felt financially exposed and unsupported, it reframed years of decision-making in a way that was impossible to ignore. Suddenly, Kody's insistence that everyone understood the risks didn't align with the emotional and financial reality being described by someone who had always played by the rules. Mary's role during this period was quieter, but no less significant. While she remained legally divorced from Kody long before the final separations, she continued to participate financially and emotionally in the family vision. Her willingness to stay connected, even when her relationship with Kody was effectively over, highlighted the power imbalance at the core of the system. Loyalty was rewarded with expectation, not security. And when Mary finally stepped away emotionally, It felt less like abandonment and more like acceptance of a truth she had resisted for years. As these relationships unraveled, Cody's leadership style hardened instead of evolving. He increasingly emphasized obedience, respect, and loyalty as prerequisites for intimacy and cooperation. But in doing so, he underestimated one crucial factor. Adult relationships cannot function on authority alone. Once emotional buy-in is gone, demands sound hollow, and viewers could sense that shift immediately. The man who once commanded attention now struggled to maintain influence. This is where the idea of isolation becomes unavoidable. Cody didn't just lose wives. He lost the environment that reinforced his worldview. Without multiple partners affirming his role, his perspective began to feel one-dimensional. Conversations that once balanced differing viewpoints became echo chambers. And when those echo chambers failed to align with public opinion, the disconnect grew even wider. Here's a question I want you to think about and answer in the comments, because it cuts to the core of this entire story. Do you believe Cody could have changed course if he had adjusted his leadership style earlier? Or was the collapse inevitable once the family grew too large and complex to manage financially? The consequences of these turning points became more visible over time. The shared future that justified sacrifices no longer existed. Yet, the investments tied to that future remained unresolved. Property sat undeveloped, contributions felt one-sided, and the idea of collective gain dissolved into individual survival. For Cody, this meant carrying the weight of decisions that were once framed as communal. Without shared belief, those decisions now looked unilateral. What makes this phase of Cody's journey particularly difficult is the lack of clear resolution. There was no reckoning, no sit-down moment where everything was laid bare. Instead, there was distance, silence, and defensiveness. For audiences, that absence of clarity created space for speculation. And in reality television, speculation is often more damaging than confession. If you're finding yourself rethinking earlier seasons while listening to this, take a moment to like the video, because that reaction means the story is doing exactly what it should, making you question narratives you once accepted at face value. By the time the family fully fractured, Cody's identity was already in crisis. He had built his life around being needed, around being central. When that role disappeared, what remained was a man grappling with loss on multiple levels: loss of family structure, loss of authority, loss of public trust, and possibly the most difficult loss of all, loss of purpose. As we approach the final part of this story, one thing becomes clear. Kody Brown's situation in 2026 is not the result of a single bad decision, but of a pattern that prioritized control over connection and structure over empathy. And once that pattern was exposed, there was no easy way back. Before we move into Part 3, share this video with someone who has followed Sister Wives from the beginning and ask them this. At what moment do you think everything became irreversible for Cody? Because in the final part, we're going to confront where Cody stands now, how the public views him in 2026, and whether isolation is the end of his story or the beginning of something entirely different. This is the final chapter, and it's the one that forces viewers to confront the uncomfortable reality of where Kody Brown actually stands as 2026 approaches. Not as a television character, not as a symbolic patriarch, but as a man whose public identity has been reshaped by the collapse of everything he once claimed to lead. The question of where he is now cannot be answered with a simple update, because his situation is defined less by location or income and more by absence. Absence of authority, absence of unity, absence of the role that once gave his life structure and validation. And that absence is what makes this chapter so difficult to watch, because there is no clear villain moment and no redemption arc yet in sight. In recent years, Cody has spoken openly about feeling misunderstood, about carrying burdens that others refuse to acknowledge, and about the emotional toll of watching his family walk away one by one. But what stands out to viewers is not the pain itself, it's the framing of that pain, rather than reflecting on how his leadership may have contributed to the outcome. He often returns to the idea that loyalty was withheld, respect was denied, and commitment was broken by others. That framing might offer personal comfort, but it does little to rebuild trust with an audience that has watched the story unfold in real time. Public perception in 2026 is far less forgiving than it once was. Early seasons allowed viewers to suspend disbelief, to accept that plural marriage came with challenges that outsiders couldn't fully understand. But years of footage, confessions, and contradictions have changed that dynamic. Viewers now feel informed. They remember the promises that were made. They remember the sacrifices that were requested. And they remember who walked away with security and who walked away with uncertainty. That collective memory shapes how Cody is seen now, and it's not easily rewritten. Isolation has become the defining theme of this phase of his life. Not just emotional isolation, but narrative isolation. Without multiple wives offering different perspectives that softened his image, Cody's voice stands alone, and when a voice stands alone, every word carries more weight, every justification is magnified, every contradiction is scrutinized. That's a heavy position for anyone, especially someone whose leadership relied on consensus and shared belief financially. The questions haven't disappeared, even if clear answers remain elusive. The long-term sustainability of life after Sister Wives is something fans continue to debate. Reality television income is rarely permanent, public goodwill matters more than ever, and unresolved property and investment questions linger in the background, not as accusations, but as symbols of plans that never reached completion. In many ways, those unfinished projects mirror Cody's current standing, paused between past authority and an uncertain future. Here's where I want you to pause for a moment and really think about this. And then answer in the comments, do you believe Cody understands why people stopped following him? Or do you think he still sees himself as the misunderstood center of a story that went wrong because others failed him? What makes this ending so compelling is that it resists easy judgment. Cody is not a cartoon villain, nor is he a simple victim. He is a man whose belief system collided with reality in a very public way, and when belief systems fail, the fallout is rarely clean. It's messy, it's slow, and it leaves behind questions that don't have satisfying answers. Some fans believe isolation is the end of Cody's story, the inevitable consequence of a leadership style that could not adapt. Others believe it could be the beginning of something quieter, more reflective, maybe even redemptive if accountability ever replaces defensiveness. But redemption requires acknowledgement, and acknowledgement requires facing truths that are deeply uncomfortable. As of now, viewers are still waiting to see whether that moment will ever come. If you've made it this far, take a second to like the video and subscribe. Because stories like this don't end when the cameras stop rolling. They evolve, and there will always be more to unpack as time goes on. What's undeniable is this: the collapse of the Brown family changed Kody Brown permanently. It altered how he is perceived, how his words are received, and how his future is imagined by the public. He once stood at the center of a system that gave him purpose. Now, he stands at the edge of a narrative that no longer revolves around him alone, and that shift may be the hardest part to accept. As we close this chapter, remember this: families don't fall apart because of one argument or one decision. They fall apart because of patterns of control, patterns of avoidance, patterns of unmet needs, and once those patterns become visible, they can't be unseen. That's why this story still resonates and why people keep asking where Kody Brown is now. Not because they want an address, but because they want understanding. Before you go, share this video with someone who's followed Sister Wives over the years and ask them this final question: do you think Cody's story ends in isolation? Or does it eventually find balance in a way we haven't seen yet? Because one thing is certain: In 2026, Kody Brown is no longer defined by how many wives he had, but by what remains when the system he built is gone.